When my father slipped a folded note into my hand at my mother's funeral, I almost dropped it. The church was so quiet you could hear the rain hitting the stained glass windows, each drop echoing through the still air. Everyone around me sat frozen in their grief, heads bowed, faces heavy with loss. And there I was, staring at my father, confused and a little scared, wondering why he would choose that moment, my mother's funeral, to pass me something so secret. At first, I thought he was just trying to comfort me in his own way. Dad wasn't the kind of man who said much. He'd always been steady, stoic, the type to fix things without making a big deal out of it. But when I looked up at him, sitting rigid in the pew beside me, his hands shaking as he clasped his Bible, I realized this wasn't about comfort. His knuckles were white, his face pale, his eyes fixed on the coffin at the front of the church. He wasn't crying. He was trembling. My fingers curled around the note, the paper soft and warm from his hand. My heart thudded as I unfolded it, expecting some fatherly words about staying strong, about how Mom would want me to be brave. But instead, in his uneven handwriting, the message was short, just 6 words. "Don't look inside the coffin." I frowned, certain I had read it wrong. My throat tightened as I whispered, "Dad, what is this supposed to mean?" He didn't answer. His jaw clenched, his lips pressed into a thin line. He only shook his head ever so slightly, as if even speaking aloud would be dangerous. I tried again, a little louder this time. "Dad?" Finally, he turned to me, his voice a rough whisper, trembling in a way I'd never heard before. "Just trust me, Emily, please." I froze, my skin prickling. He never begged. Not my father. Hearing that plea cracked something in me. I glanced toward the coffin at the front of the church. It was polished oak, closed tight, draped with white lilies and a framed photo of my mother smiling beside it. That was how everyone in the church remembered her. Gentle, kind, a warm presence that filled every room she walked into. Not like this. Not behind a sealed lid. The pastor's voice echoed through the sanctuary, talking about rest and peace. But my father wasn't listening. His hand shook as he wiped at his forehead, his eyes darting to the coffin and then to me, as if willing me to obey his note. I gripped the paper in my lap, the words burning into me. "Don't look inside the coffin." Why not? I wanted to scream the question, but instead I just sat there staring at the flowers, the framed photograph, and the coffin that seemed suddenly larger than life, like it was hiding something the rest of the world wasn't meant to see. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed my father's hands trembling harder, the wooden pew creaking as he shifted. For a moment, I thought grief had finally broken him. After all, Mom's death had been so sudden, so unexplained. A natural cause, they said, though she had been perfectly healthy days before. But now, watching him, the way his lips moved silently like he was praying, or maybe warning himself not to speak, I realized this wasn't just grief. This was fear. I leaned closer. "Dad, you're scaring me," I whispered. His eyes stayed fixed on the coffin. His lips parted, his voice barely audible. "Don't look, Emily, just don't." And then, as if the universe wanted to punish me for doubting him, it happened. The lid shifted. Just once. Subtle, like the faintest push from inside, but enough for me to see it. Enough for my stomach to drop, for my skin to crawl, for the breath to seize in my chest. I jerked upright, eyes wide, looking around the church in panic, but nobody else reacted. Daniel, my younger brother, sat hunched in the pew ahead of us, scrolling aimlessly on his phone. Aunt Linda dabbed her eyes with a handkerchief, whispering to the neighbor beside her. The pastor droned on, his voice steady, oblivious. It was only me. Only I had seen it. My gaze snapped back to Dad, and the way he gripped the pew so tightly his knuckles looked ready to split told me he had seen it too. His whole body trembled, but still he whispered, so low it was almost a growl, "Don't say a word." In that moment, I felt my heart split into two. One part of me wanted to scream, to run down the aisle, to throw open the coffin, and prove to myself I wasn't losing my mind. The other part clung to my father's warning, to that note now crumpled in my sweaty fist. Because if he was this scared, if he was begging me to keep silent in front of everyone we loved, then whatever was inside that coffin. It wasn't my mother resting peacefully, and deep down, I knew it. Something was alive in there. I never thought my mother's funeral would feel this cold. Not the weather. The storm outside made sense. It was the way the air inside the church felt hollow, as if the walls themselves knew something wasn't right. The scent of lilies filled the sanctuary, so thick it made me nauseous. Mom had loved lilies. She used to keep a vase of them on the kitchen table every spring, the smell drifting through the house like a gentle reminder that life kept blooming. But here, in this place, the scent was suffocating. It clung to me, heavy, fake. I kept staring at her picture by the coffin, her smile frozen in time, her hair pinned neatly behind her ears. That photo had been taken at last year's 4th of July barbecue, when she had laughed so hard at my brother Daniel's clumsy fireworks display that she nearly dropped her plate. That was the version of her everyone wanted to remember. Happy? Healthy? Alive. But that wasn't what I saw when I closed my eyes. I saw the last time I visited her in the hospital. She was lying there, pale but breathing, her chest rising with effort. They had said it was sudden organ failure. That explanation never sat right with me. She had been vibrant just days before, gardening in the backyard, calling me to talk about a new recipe she wanted to try. When I touched her hand in that sterile hospital room, I had noticed the bruises around her wrist. I had asked the nurse, and she brushed it off. IV insertion marks. But I knew the difference. Something about those bruises gnawed at me, and now she was gone. I shifted in the pew, my black dress clinging to my legs. My younger brother Daniel sat a row ahead of me, his phone tucked under the hymnal, pretending to scroll when he thought nobody was watching. That was his way of coping, burying himself in screens, drowning out reality with endless noise. He was only 22, still figuring out how to be a man, and losing Mom had stripped away the little foundation he had left. Beside me, Dad sat like a statue. Robert Carter, my father, the man who had carried our family through every storm, now looked like he was barely holding it together. His hands trembled when he gripped his Bible, and when he slipped me that note earlier, I had seen the veins in his neck tighten, like wires pulled too tight. Grief should have made him look broken. Instead, he looked haunted. Behind us, I could hear my Aunt Linda whispering with one of the neighbors. Her voice carried sharp and nasal, even though she tried to hide it behind a handkerchief. She was Mom's younger sister, though they couldn't have been more different. Mom was warmth. Linda was ice. I caught fragments of her words, something about Robert's behavior and strange circumstances. She had been circling like a vulture since Mom's death, volunteering to handle the estate, inserting herself into every decision. Her presence made my stomach twist. The pastor's voice droned from the pulpit, talking about rest and everlasting peace. The congregation nodded solemnly, but I couldn't focus. My eyes kept darting to the coffin. It was too perfect, too sealed, as if hiding something fragile inside. I remembered what Dad had written. "Don't look inside the coffin." The words burned in my chest. I pressed the note tighter in my palm, wishing I could ignore it. But I couldn't. Not when every nerve in my body screamed that something about this day wasn't just sad, it was wrong. And yet here I was, surrounded by people who looked at me with pitying eyes. To them, I was just the grieving daughter, sitting beside her trembling father, clutching a secret she couldn't explain. I leaned forward, whispering Daniel's name. He glanced back, his eyes red, though I could tell he hadn't cried. "You okay?" he mouthed. I nodded, though it was a lie, because nothing about this felt okay. I tried to remind myself of the woman I had lost, the way Mom used to hum while folding laundry, how she'd tuck stray strands of hair behind my ear, even when I was far too old for such gestures. She was the glue in our family, the one who softened Dad's rough edges and reminded Daniel to eat before running off with his friends. Without her, everything felt like it was cracking, and yet the strangest part wasn't her absence. It was my father's presence. The way he kept staring at that coffin, his lips moving in silent prayers, or maybe silent warnings. His hand twitched every time the pastor said, "Rest in peace." His grief wasn't quiet mourning. It was fear. Fear of what? I should have been mourning. I should have been clinging to memories, crying for the woman I loved. Instead, all I could think about was the note. All I could see was my father's trembling hands, his pale face, his warning. "Don't look inside the coffin." And though I didn't yet understand why, I felt a chill run down my spine because I knew this wasn't just about loss. Something darker was lurking beneath the lid of that coffin, and whether I wanted to or not, I was being pulled straight toward it. The pastor's voice carried on, steady and low, but I couldn't focus on a single word. My eyes were glued to the coffin. Every breath I took felt shallow, each one filling me with dread rather than air. I replayed the moment in my head. The lid had moved. I wasn't imagining it. I knew what I'd seen. But when I looked around the church, everyone else was oblivious. Daniel still scrolled quietly on his phone, his thumb moving like a metronome. Aunt Linda dabbed her eyes, her lips curling into a sad little smile as she leaned toward the neighbor, whispering again. The other guests looked forward, faces composed, some even bored, as though this were just another ceremony in their lives. I wanted to scream at all of them. "Didn't you see it?" But I didn't. My father's warning echoed in my mind. I gripped his sleeve. "Dad, I saw it move." He froze. Slowly, without turning his head, he spoke. His voice cracked, shaking just above a whisper. "I told you not to look. Just sit still." "Dad," Emily. His voice hardened, though his hand trembled on the pew. "Please, don't say a word." I sat back, swallowing hard, but my thoughts spun faster with every passing second. Mom had been declared dead. Sudden organ failure. That was the official story. But now I couldn't shake the image of her pale wrist in the hospital bed, the dark bruises. I remembered how the doctor avoided my questions, how quickly they had pushed us out of the room after she flatlined. "Don't look inside the coffin." It was starting to make sense. Terrifying sense. The pastor's voice grew louder as he invited the congregation to bow their heads. As people leaned forward in prayer, I glanced at the coffin again and froze. It shifted. This time, it wasn't just a trick of my imagination. The entire coffin trembled for half a second, the faintest rattle of wood against metal hinges. I gasped, a hand flying to my mouth, and my chair creaked loudly in the silence of bowed heads. Daniel turned, annoyed, mouthing, "What?" I shook my head quickly, forcing myself still. My father's eyes darted to mine. He looked more terrified than I had ever seen him. His lips formed a single word, "Please." I wanted to obey. I wanted to believe this was all in my head, a hallucination born from grief, but my body wouldn't let me. My pulse raced, my hands went slick with sweat. Every instinct screamed that something unnatural was happening inside that coffin. The prayer ended, and people straightened. The pastor launched into a passage about eternal life, but my focus tunneled on Dad. "What's going on?" I whispered fiercely. "Tell me the truth." He leaned closer, his voice so low I barely heard it over the storm outside. "Not here, not now, just wait." That answer wasn't enough. It only made me angrier, more desperate. "Dad, if Mom's stop." His hand gripped mine, cold and clammy. "Please, Emily, you don't know what you're saying." My chest tightened, fury and fear twisting together. He was hiding something. He knew. Meanwhile, Aunt Linda turned her head slightly, her sharp eyes catching me. For a split second, I thought she'd overheard. She smiled faintly, too rehearsed, and then turned back to the pastor. The sight made my stomach churn. Something about her calmness, her composure set off alarm bells. She hadn't shed a real tear since the funeral began, and yet she'd been the loudest voice in insisting on a closed coffin. She'd even arranged the flowers herself, making sure the lid was buried under lilies and ribbons. At the time, I thought it was a gesture of devotion. Now, it felt like a cover-up. The storm outside intensified, thunder rolling in the distance. My heart pounded harder with each strike, every clap of thunder sounding like a warning drumbeat. I looked again at the coffin. My body buzzed with adrenaline. I couldn't sit still anymore. I whispered to Daniel, my voice shaky. "Did you see it?" He frowned. "See what?" "The coffin. It moved." He rolled his eyes, shaking his head. "Em, you're losing it. Just sit down, okay? Don't make this harder." I wanted to yell at him, but I bit down on my lips so hard it nearly bled. He hadn't seen. Nobody had seen. Except Dad, and maybe Aunt Linda. The tension was suffocating. My father's grip on my hand only grew tighter, his knuckles digging into my skin. I glanced at him and his expression said it all. Terror. Not sorrow. Terror. That was when the awful realization began to crystallize in my mind. Whatever was happening, it wasn't an accident and it wasn't over. My mother's death wasn't what they told us. And if that coffin really held her body, then maybe she wasn't dead at all. The thought lodged in my throat like a stone, too heavy to swallow. And as the pastor's voice rang through the church about resting peacefully in eternal light, I couldn't stop staring at that coffin, because now I knew. Peace had nothing to do with what was inside. The service dragged on, every word from the pastor echoing like it came from far away. I couldn't focus. My body buzzed with restless energy, the kind that makes your hands twitch and your knees bounce. I couldn't sit still, couldn't pretend nothing was wrong. Dad's note burned against my palm, crumpled now from how tightly I had clenched it. Don't look inside the coffin. The warning repeated in my head like a broken record, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized it wasn't just a warning. It was a challenge. A door slammed shut right in front of me, daring me to open it. When the pastor finally called for the closing hymn, voices rose around me in shaky unison. I didn't sing. My throat was dry, my chest tight. I kept staring at the coffin, every nerve in me screaming that I couldn't let this go. As the last notes faded, people began to stand, filing toward the doors. The storm had grown heavier outside, thunder booming, the downpour rattling the stained glass. The congregation whispered goodbyes, brushing past my family with pats on the shoulder, murmured condolences, promises of casserole dishes delivered later. I waited, pretending to follow the motions, but my eyes never left that coffin. Dad stood slowly, looking as if he had aged 10 years in the span of an hour. His hand brushed my arm, almost mechanical. "Come on, Emily, let's go." "No," I said, before I even realized it was out loud. He stopped, his eyes cutting to mine, sharper than I'd ever seen them. "Emily." His voice was low, firm, a father's command. "Not here, not now, don't do this." I shook my head. My whole body trembled, but my voice stayed steady. "I can't just leave, Dad. I saw it twice." His lips pressed tight, his jaw muscle twitching. "You'll regret it." For a moment, guilt stabbed at me. He wasn't just my father. He was a grieving husband, too. But then I remembered how his hand had shaken when he slipped me that note, how his eyes hadn't left the coffin once. He knew something. He had known it all along, and he was too scared to act. That realization made my decision for me. I leaned close to my younger brother as he slid his phone into his pocket. "Daniel," I whispered urgently, "I need you to distract Aunt Linda." He blinked at me, frowning. "What? Why?" "Please, just do it. Keep her busy for 5 minutes." He shook his head, confused, already pulling back. "Em, this isn't the time. Just go home. Dad's right." I grabbed his arm, forcing him to look me in the eyes. "Daniel, please, for Mom." Something in my voice broke through his stubbornness. He stared at me, wide-eyed, then sighed and nodded reluctantly. "Fine. But you owe me for this." As the last guests drifted out, I hung back, watching him approach Linda. He muttered something I couldn't hear, but she frowned and followed him toward the side hallway, her heels clicking on the tile. That left me alone with Dad. He was shaking his head before I even moved. "Emily, don't." I turned to him, my voice trembling but steady enough to carry. "Dad, I need to know the truth. Mom deserves that. We deserve that." He swallowed hard, looking like he might collapse. His shoulders slumped, his eyes glassy with something between fear and resignation. "You don't understand what's in there. Some things—" His voice cracked. "Some things you can't unsee." I stared at him, my heart pounding so hard I thought I might faint. "Then you've already seen it, haven't you?" His silence was all the answer I needed. I stepped toward the coffin, each footstep echoing like thunder in the hollow church. My palms sweated as I gripped the edge of the lid. The polished wood was cold, smooth beneath my fingertips. Behind me, I heard my father's choked whisper. "Emily, please." I paused, closing my eyes for half a second. This was it, the line between ignorance and truth, between safety and danger. I could walk away and live in the comfort of what everyone else believed, or I could open it and face what I already feared. When I opened my eyes again, my decision was made. "I'm sorry, Dad, but I can't live with not knowing." His sob was the only sound behind me as I braced myself, hands gripping the lid. My arms shook from more than just fear. I was ready to see, ready to confront whatever secret had driven my father to trembling silence. The coffin loomed larger than life, like a locked door holding something that could shatter us all. And I was about to turn the key. The sanctuary was empty now, except for me, my father, and the coffin. The storm outside roared against the stained glass windows, thunder rolling like a warning bell. My fingers curled around the edge of the polished oak lid, slick with sweat. For a heartbeat, I froze. The world felt like it was holding its breath, waiting to see what I would do. My father's voice came from behind me, broken and desperate. "Emily, don't!" I turned my head just enough to see him. His face was pale, his hands trembling so hard he could barely stand. He wasn't angry anymore. He was terrified. "I have to," I whispered. And before I could lose my courage, I pushed. The lid creaked open, slow and heavy, the hinges groaning like they hadn't wanted to move. My heart slammed in my chest as I peeled it back inch by inch, the smell of lilies mixing with something sour, metallic. And then I saw her, my mother, but not still, not gone. Her eyes snapped open. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Her pupils darted wildly, her chest rising in shallow, panicked gasps against the cloth stuffed into her mouth. Her wrists, bruised and raw, strained against leather straps hidden beneath her funeral dress. A muffled cry erupted from her throat, a sound so desperate and animalistic it ripped straight through me. "Mom!" My scream tore. From me, echoing off the walls. I reached down, fumbling to pull the gag from her mouth, my hands shaking. Her lips were cracked, her voice hoarse when it finally came out. "Emily, help me, please." Behind me, I heard my father collapse into a pew, sobbing into his hands. "I told them she was gone," he choked. "I begged them to let me see her. They wouldn't. They said it was better this way, but I knew she wasn't." My brain struggled to process the chaos. Alive. She was alive. My mother, the woman I had mourned, the woman everyone in this church believed had passed, was bound and gagged, seconds from being buried alive. The storm outside cracked open the sky with lightning, the flash illuminating the sanctuary like fire. That was when I heard it, the sharp, deliberate click of heels. Aunt Linda. She stood in the doorway, her face frozen in a smile that didn't touch her eyes. For the first time, I saw it clearly. The coldness, the calculation, the satisfaction. "You weren't supposed to see that," she said, her voice calm, almost soothing. I froze, my hand still tugging at Mom's straps. "What did you do to her?" Linda's smile widened, her tone dripping with venom disguised as pity. "Sarah always had everything, didn't she? The perfect husband, the perfect children, the perfect life. While what did I get? Nothing. Always second best. Always in her shadow." My stomach twisted. "You did this? You tried to bury her alive? She was supposed to die quietly." Linda's voice cracked like a whip. "But your father couldn't let go. And now you, Emily, you just had to stick your nose where it didn't belong." My mother's cries grew louder, frantic, her wrists scraping against the straps. I worked faster, ripping at the buckles, my fingers raw. Dad finally lifted his head, his voice breaking as he shouted, "Linda, you'll pay for this!" But she only laughed, low and bitter. "Robert, you always were too weak. That's why you never saw it coming." I managed to unbuckle one strap, freeing Mom's right arm. She immediately clawed at the gag, coughing violently as she tore it free. Her voice was shredded but full of fury. You monster!" For the first time, Linda's composure cracked. Her face twisted, her eyes flashing with rage. She stepped forward, her heels striking the floor like gunshots. I stood protectively in front of my mother, my body trembling but planted firmly between her and Linda. "You're not touching her again." The air was electric, charged with terror and fury. For a moment, none of us moved. The storm outside shook the building, thunder rattling the very pews, and then sirens wailed in the distance. Linda froze, her head snapping toward the sound. Daniel's voice rang from the hallway, frantic and defiant. "Over here! In here!" He had called the police. The color drained from Linda's face. She spun, darting toward the side exit, but Dad lunged forward, tackling her to the ground with a strength I didn't know he still had. The sound of her scream was drowned out by the storm. I turned back to my mother, finally freeing her last strap. She collapsed into my arms, sobbing, her body trembling against mine. "Emily," she whispered through tears, "I thought I'd never see you again." My own tears blurred everything, but I clung to her, shaking with relief. "I've got you, Mom. You're safe now. I swear, you're safe." The church doors burst open, red and blue lights flashing against the stained glass as officers stormed in. They pulled Linda up from the floor, her face twisted in fury as she shrieked. She was supposed to stay dead, but my mother was alive. And in that moment, with her in my arms, I knew nothing would ever be the same again. The church smelled different after everything. The lilies still lingered, but now the air was thick with rain, mud, and something raw, fear giving way to relief. The flashing red and blue lights outside painted the stained glass windows in frantic colors, as if the building itself was exhaling after holding its breath too long. I sat on the pew, my arm wrapped around Mom as paramedics checked her vitals. She looked fragile, her skin pale and bruised, but her chest rose steadily, her breath slow and real. Every time her eyes fluttered shut, I felt my heart race until she opened them again and squeezed my hand. I had almost lost her. No, I had lost her. If I hadn't seen the coffin shift, if Dad hadn't slipped me that note, she would have been lowered into the ground alive. The thought made my stomach turn. Dad sat across from me, his shoulders slumped, his hands still trembling, though now from exhaustion instead of fear. He looked up at me once, his eyes glassy and red, and whispered, "I'm sorry." I shook my head. "You saved her, Dad. You saved all of us." He broke down then, his hands covering his face as years of stoicism cracked wide open. For so long I had seen him as unshakable, the rock of our family. But tonight I saw the truth. He wasn't unshakable. He was human. He'd been terrified. And still, he had found a way to get me the warning that changed everything. Daniel stood near the doorway, his phone still in his hand, his face pale. He had been the one to call the police. When our eyes met, he mouthed, "Are you okay?" I nodded. We weren't okay, not yet, but we were alive. Mom was alive, and that was enough for now. The officers led Linda past us, her wrists cuffed, her face twisted in rage. She struggled against their grip, spitting venom as she passed. "You'll regret this, all of you." I stared at her, my chest tightening. This was the woman I had called my aunt, the one who had babysat me, bought me birthday presents, smiled at family dinners. And all along, she had been capable of this. The jealousy in her eyes, the bitterness in her voice, it was all real. She had wanted my mother gone, erased, buried alive so she could take what wasn't hers. When the doors slammed shut behind her, I let out a breath I didn't realize I had been holding. The paramedics loaded Mom onto a stretcher, strapping her in gently, speaking softly to her as they prepared to take her to the hospital. She looked at me, her eyes glassy with tears. "Emily, you saved me." I bent down, my forehead against hers, sobbing quietly. "No, Mom. We saved you. Dad, Daniel, we all did. We couldn't let you go." Her hand brushed my cheek, and I held on to that touch like it was the most precious thing in the world. Because it was. As they wheeled her out into the storm, I stayed behind for a moment, staring at the coffin still sitting at the front of the sanctuary. The coffin that had almost become her tomb. My legs shook as I walked toward it, my hand brushing against the polished wood one last time. For the rest of my life, I knew I would never look at a coffin the same way again. When I finally stepped outside, the storm had begun to break. The rain slowed, the thunder distant now, like the world was calming after the chaos. I stood under the overhang, watching the ambulance pull away, its lights flashing against the wet pavement. Dad came to stand beside me, silent for a long moment. Then he said, "I thought I'd lost her, Emily. I thought I'd lost everything." I turned to him. You didn't. You kept her alive long enough for us to find out. You're the reason she's still here." He shook his head, tears streaking down his face, but for the first time since this nightmare began, I saw relief in his expression. The officers lingered by their cars. Daniel leaned against the church wall, staring up at the rain. And me? I stood there, soaked in grief and gratitude all at once, because I understood something now, something I hadn't before. We always think of funerals as endings, a chance to say goodbye, to close the chapter on someone we love. But that night, I learned the truth. Sometimes funerals are beginnings. They reveal what's been hidden, what's been silenced, what someone has tried to bury, not just in the ground, but in our hearts. I thought my mother's funeral would be the last time I saw her. Instead, it was the night I pulled her back from the grave. And I'll never forget what that taught me. Never ignore the small signs. Never silence your instincts. Because sometimes the truth doesn't scream. It whispers, trembles, shifts just once beneath a coffin lid. And if you're not brave enough to see it, it might be lost forever. And that's the story of the note my father slipped me at my mother's funeral. 6 words that changed everything. What still haunts me most is how close we came to losing her forever. If I hadn't trusted my instincts, if I hadn't listened to the fear in my father's eyes, my mother would have been lowered into the ground alive. That thought keeps me awake at night, but it also reminds me to pay attention, to trust myself, even when no one else believes me. Stories like this aren't easy to tell, but I share them because they remind us of the strength we don't know we have until we're forced to find it. If this story made your heart race, if it pulled you in and left you thinking about what you would have done, then please take a second to like this video. It really helps the channel grow and lets me know you want more stories like this. Don't forget to share it with a friend, because sometimes these chilling, unbelievable experiences are the ones worth talking about. And of course, I'd love to hear what you think. What would you have done if you were in my place? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. Finally, make sure you subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss the next story. Trust me, you won't want to. Until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and always trust your instincts. Or